How the Divine Mercy Chaplet can end the fear that haunts your soul. Fear can feel like a shadow that no one else notices but you. It hides in your routine. It creeps into your nights. It whispers when you try to pray. You go to work. You talk to people. You smile at the right moments. But inside there's a silent tremor that never stops. It's not weakness. It's not lack of faith. It's a kind of prison that builds its walls from invisible bricks, trapping you where no one can see. This is where many people live today, functioning on the outside while spiritually paralyzed on the inside. The Divine Mercy Chaplet was never meant to be just a gentle devotion. It was given for people exactly like this, for moments exactly like these, when fear becomes a weight that no conversation, no therapy, no human support can lift completely. Right now, someone watching this feels their chest tighten at night and doesn't know why. Someone else keeps replaying mistakes, sins, or losses in their head and wonders if God has turned away. Someone prays and feels nothing. These are not random emotions. They are signs that fear has done what fear does best. It has convinced the soul that it is alone, guilty, or abandoned. But Jesus did not give St. Faustina this prayer to fill silence. He gave it as a weapon to tear through that darkness, to pour mercy exactly where fear sits, and to break the illusion that you are trapped. This video is not just about learning a prayer. It's about walking into a battlefield you didn't know you were standing on and realizing you are not unarmed. By the end of this journey, you will see fear for what it truly is, and you will see mercy for what it truly does. You will discover how the Divine Mercy Chaplet ends fear not by making you stronger, but by bringing you into a power far greater than your own. When fear becomes a prison you can't see. There are prisons that echo with metal doors and concrete walls, but the most suffocating ones are silent. They don't make noise when they lock. They don't require a sentence. They build slowly, invisibly, over years of quiet moments when your soul begins to retreat, when trust is replaced by suspicion, when peace is replaced by tension, and when the voice of fear begins to feel more familiar than the voice of God. The hardest part about this prison is that people can live in it for decades without knowing its name. They just feel the symptoms. A weight in the chest that never quite lifts. A restlessness at night that no blanket can soothe. A whisper that says, "You're not safe," even when the room is quiet and the doors are locked. Fear rarely comes all at once. It sneaks in through small cracks, trauma, betrayal, uncertainty, silence from heaven. And before you notice, it's rearranged the furniture of your heart. The mind learns to compensate. You smile more often. You get better at pretending. You learn how to make your voice sound confident when inside you feel like you're falling. Faith becomes performance. Prayer becomes routine. And somewhere along the way, the raw, intimate connection with God becomes distant, like a memory fading in the fog. This is the prison that few talk about, because talking about it would require admitting that fear is stronger than we thought. But the truth is, fear is not just an emotion. It is a spiritual bondage. And it's not your fault that you've felt it. The world has taught us to survive, not to surrender. And fear feeds on that survival instinct. It tells us we need to be in control. It tells us we must predict, protect, prepare for everything. But God never asked for your control. He asked for your trust. And this is where the Divine Mercy Chaplet comes in, not as a sweet Catholic tradition, not as a string of repeated words, but as an antidote to the paralysis of fear. This prayer, given by Jesus himself, is constructed in such a way that it confronts the very architecture of fear. Because every time you pray, For the sake of his sorrowful passion, you're not just pleading for comfort. You're confessing that the passion of Christ was enough to cover your fear, enough to redeem your story, enough to reach you even in the depths of your hidden prison. This kind of surrender is not weakness. It is the first act of spiritual rebellion against the lie that fear is eternal. So many people walk around with invisible chains. Their faces look calm, but inside, they are one crisis away from collapse. They pray, but they're afraid it's too late. They serve others, but feel no joy. They fear death, but also fear living like this forever. What they need is not more strength. What they need is mercy. And mercy doesn't knock. It breaks in. Mercy finds the cell that no one else knows about and shatters it from the inside. But mercy requires permission. It will not violate your will. The chaplet becomes that permission. Every bead you touch is a key turning. Every word you speak is a crack in the wall. And every act of trust you choose is another chain snapping loose. God does not ignore your fear. He sees it. He knows the weight you carry before you even open your eyes in the morning. But He also knows what that fear has tried to steal from you. Your peace, your clarity, your relationship with Him. And He is not passive in the face of that theft. The Divine Mercy Chaplet is His answer. Not in theory, but in fire. And when prayed with true surrender, it doesn't just comfort, it delivers. Because it speaks the one truth that fear cannot stand. Jesus, I trust in you. The invisible war between mercy and terror. Fear doesn't just exist, it operates. It builds structures, it sets traps. It has a voice, a rhythm, a pattern. And once it learns your wounds, it begins its campaign. But what most people never realize is that fear is not neutral. It is part of a much greater war. One that began long before your anxiety ever showed up. One that stretches from the fall of Lucifer to the blood poured out on the cross. And whether or not you've ever been told this, you are standing in the middle of it. Not as a spectator, as a soul in the battlefield. Fear is not just an emotional problem. It is a weapon in the hands of darkness, used to confuse your identity, distort your perception of God, and cut off your access to truth. Fear was never meant to be part of your story. It entered when sin did. It grew when trust died. And now it haunts the spiritual lives of millions who think it's normal to feel spiritually numb. But here's the truth most people overlook. Mercy is not a passive virtue. Divine mercy is not soft. It is not abstract. It is not sentimental. It is fire. It is war against every lie hell has ever whispered. It is the response of heaven to the terror unleashed in this world. And when Jesus gave the chaplet of divine mercy to Saint Faustina, He wasn't offering a poetic suggestion. He was handing down a weapon, one forged in His suffering, one sharpened by His love, one that, when used in faith, destabilizes the very strongholds fear hides behind. That's why you may feel resistance every time you try to pray it. That's why you feel sleepy when you begin, or distracted before you finish. The enemy doesn't fear your stress, but he does fear your surrender. Because the moment you begin to say, "Eternal Father, I offer you the body and blood," you are stepping onto sacred ground. You are activating an intercession that does what no medication, no therapist, no inner pep talk can ever accomplish. This is not superstition. This is not mysticism for the sake of emotion. This is spiritual warfare at its most direct. When fear grips your body, your thoughts, your sleep, your relationships, it's not just a psychological glitch. It's a spiritual interference. Something wants to keep you from believing that God is who He says He is. Something wants you to think you are abandoned, guilty, forgotten, unsafe. But in the Divine Mercy Chaplet, every phrase is a contradiction to that voice. When you offer the Passion of Christ, you are saying, "I am not forgotten." When you declare, "Have mercy on us and on the whole world," you are declaring that the mercy of God is bigger than the fear that stalks your mind. Terror thrives in silence, in isolation, in secrecy. But mercy thrives in repetition, in proclamation, in confidence. The chaplet is not just a comfort, it's an offensive strike. It reclaims territory that fear has stolen. Every time you speak those words, you are participating in a cosmic reversal. What fear tried to close, mercy opens. What terror tried to crush, mercy lifts. You're not begging God to act. You're agreeing with what He's already done. The blood has already been poured out. The price already paid. What remains is your alignment with that truth. That's what the chaplet does. It realigns the soul to mercy's frequency. There is no neutral ground. Not in this war. Every day, every soul is either moving closer to mercy or deeper into fear. And when you choose to pray this chaplet, not as a routine, but as an act of war, you are choosing sides. You are telling fear, "I will not stay here. I will not accept this as my normal. I have a Savior who died with mercy on His lips, and I have the right to claim that mercy now." When the church seems quiet, when your thoughts get loud, when the world spins with panic and confusion, you are not defenseless. You are not outnumbered. You are equipped. You are protected. Because the divine mercy doesn't tremble in the face of terror. It crushes it. What the saints whispered about fear but the church rarely teaches. The saints weren't superheroes. They felt fear like we do. They bled, they cried, they doubted, they battled darkness in silence. What sets them apart is not the absence of fear, but how they responded when fear came knocking. And what's often hidden in their writings, what rarely makes it into homilies or textbooks, is the raw, unfiltered truth that fear is a battleground where saints are made or lost. Not because they never felt it, but because they faced it, and they chose trust when their bodies screamed otherwise. This is the part most people never hear. It's not about stained glass perfection. It's about quiet nights of agony, when even holy souls whispered, "God, where are you?" Saint Faustina herself wrote of terrifying spiritual trials. She spoke of moments when darkness surrounded her so completely that she could barely breathe. She wrote of nights when she felt abandoned by heaven, tormented by voices, tempted to despair. But in those very hours, what did she do? She clung to mercy. She didn't rely on her emotions. She didn't wait to feel peace. She prayed anyway. She wrote anyway. She trusted anyway. In one of her most haunting entries, she confesses that it was only by repeating, "Jesus, I trust in you," that she was able to keep her soul from collapsing into fear. Not once, not twice, but over and over, like breathing, like survival. This wasn't romantic suffering. It was war, and mercy was her only weapon. Saint Teresa of Avila, a mystic and doctor of the Church, warned of the soul's temptation to retreat when faced with spiritual dryness and fear. She said, "The devil uses fear to keep us from deeper prayer. He distracts, exaggerates, confuses." But she taught that perseverance through that fear, especially in vocal prayer, cuts through the fog. And what prayer cuts deeper than one rooted in the Passion of Christ? What prayer confronts the devil more than a soul pleading the blood of Jesus, not just for itself, but for the whole world? And then there's Padre Pio, tormented by demonic attacks, visited by terrifying presences, afflicted in his body and soul. People saw his holiness, but few understood his suffering. In letters to spiritual children, he warned them never to dialogue with fear, never to entertain the thoughts it brings, because fear disguises itself as humility. It says, "I am not worthy to pray, God must be distant." But Padre Pio said, that is exactly when you must pray, exactly when you must trust. Because mercy does not depend on how worthy you feel. It depends on who God is. These saints weren't writing academic theology. They were writing from the trenches, from hospital beds, convent cells, cold chapels at midnight. And all of them pointed to the same truth, that fear may shout, but it cannot drown out mercy. That even in the deepest spiritual desolation, the act of trusting God, repeated, chosen, clung to, is the crack in the wall where light gets in. They didn't wait for fear to leave. They walked through it, holding a rosary soaked in mercy. Today, we often want faith to feel good. We want peace to come quickly. But the saints knew better. They knew that fear often intensifies just before breakthrough. They knew that hell throws its loudest voices when heaven is about to act. And that is why they whispered the truth the church doesn't always speak loudly enough. That the prayer you say through gritted teeth, with a shaking voice and a broken heart, is sometimes the most powerful prayer of all. The Divine Mercy Chaplet wasn't given to those who already feel holy. It was given to those who feel like they're drowning. And the saints, those quiet witnesses, stand as proof that fear doesn't disqualify you. It trains you. If you let it drive you to mercy, fear becomes fuel for sanctity. That's the mystery most people miss. That's what the saints knew and lived. And now their voices echo to us, not in books, but in the invisible places where we struggle. They whisper the same words they once cried in darkness. Trust Him. Even now. Especially now. Fear is a lie told to your soul. Here's why. Fear is not neutral. It is deceptive. It whispers truths twisted into lies. It doesn't announce itself as an enemy. It pretends to be caution, preparation, wisdom, survival. But underneath, it is a lie. Fear tells your soul that God is absent when He is near, that mercy is insufficient when it has already poured over your life, that your failures define you when they are already covered by the blood of Christ. And the most dangerous part is how subtle it is. Fear doesn't scream. It murmurs. It lingers in quiet thoughts, in hesitation, in the small doubts that compound over time until the soul believes it has no voice, no power, no worth. It convinces you that prayer is a ritual rather than a lifeline, that surrender is weakness rather than trust, that mercy is abstract rather than the real force breaking every chain. The soul becomes a battlefield of distortion, believing lies about itself, about life, about God. This is why anxiety and despair often feel unshakable. Because they are not merely emotions, they are lies amplified until they masquerade as reality. Fear tells you that you are alone, that you cannot be saved, that no one understands. It takes memory, imagination, guilt, and disappointment, and uses them as tools. A single night of worry can become a week, a month, a decade. A single failure can be magnified into a narrative of perpetual inadequacy. It distorts perception until the soul cannot distinguish between reality and the story fear has built. And when you try to pray, when you try to seek God, fear sabotages your voice. It tells you, your words are empty. You are unworthy. God does not hear. Suddenly, prayer feels like speaking into a void. Silence feels safer than hope. That is the lie, and lies thrive in isolation. The Divine Mercy Chaplet confronts this lie directly. It is structured to realign the soul to truth. Every bead, every phrase, every invocation is a reminder that what fear says is false. When you say, "For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world," you are declaring the truth of God's presence, power, and love. You are acknowledging that fear is not the final authority. Mercy is. The repetition itself is a tool. It trains the mind and the heart to reject the distortions fear creates. It teaches the soul to lean on something greater than fleeting feelings. In effect, the chaplet becomes a clarifying lens. It allows you to see reality as it is. God is here. You are loved. You are not alone. Fear is a shadow. Mercy is light. The reason this works is not psychological, though the mind is affected. It is spiritual. Lies are cast down when truth is proclaimed. Fear loses power when mercy takes its place. The chaplet is a weapon of proclamation. It does not argue with fear. It does not reason with it. It asserts the reality of God, the victory of Christ, the accessibility of mercy, and the indestructibility of hope. Each recitation is an act of resistance. Each invocation of the Passion is a declaration. I will not accept your story of defeat. I will not believe you when you say I am alone. I will not surrender to the terror that masquerades as wisdom. This is why the saints teach that repeating words in faith, even when the heart trembles, has power far beyond what the mind can measure. The soul recognizes the truth, even when it does not yet feel it. Fear's lie is simple, persistent, and persuasive. But it is never stronger than mercy. And mercy is activated through trust, repetition, and surrender. The Divine Mercy Chaplet turns the lies back on themselves. It strips fear of its authority by claiming the authority of the passion, the blood, and the love of Jesus. And when prayed faithfully, the soul experiences a release that cannot be explained by emotion alone. The heaviness lifts, clarity emerges, and the chains that once felt invisible are loosened. Fear is exposed as a lie. Mercy proves itself as reality. And the soul begins to breathe freely again, not because fear has disappeared entirely, but because its power has been broken by the truth it cannot deny. The 3-hour hour. Why demons fear it more than you do. The 3-hour hour is not just a time on the clock. It is the hour of mercy, a sacred moment stamped with significance that few truly understand. At the very hour when Jesus gave his life on the cross, the veil between fear and freedom becomes thinner. Darkness recoils, not because of ritual, not because of superstition, but because mercy itself moves in the unseen realms at that hour. Demons, who have spent centuries sowing terror in the hearts of humanity, tremble at it. They know that at 3 o'clock, prayers steeped in the passion of Christ carry a force impossible to counter. This is why Saint Faustina called it the hour of grace, the hour of salvation, the hour when souls are given the opportunity to step out of the prison of fear into the embrace of divine mercy. It is not coincidence, it is strategic. The enemy knows, and he fears, what mercy can do. Many people have never prayed at this hour. They dismiss it as arbitrary or symbolic. Yet those who do encounter it describe a shift so profound that it cannot be explained by chance. The heaviness that clings to the heart, the restless thoughts that circle endlessly, the anxiety that tightens the chest, all of it can be interrupted by deliberate prayer in this sacred hour. Imagine a battlefield where the enemy knows reinforcements are arriving. That is the spiritual reality at 3 o'clock. The invisible legions that seek to perpetuate fear pause, falter, and retreat, if only for the moment. This is why the chaplet prayed at this time is not merely a routine devotion. It is a spiritual strike, a declaration that mercy has arrived and fear has no ultimate authority over your soul. Jesus revealed this to Faustina not as a suggestion, but as a promise. He spoke of rays of mercy shining from his heart, reaching those who pray faithfully at 3 o'clock. These rays penetrate the deepest wounds, the most entrenched fears, and the long-standing chains of anxiety. They do not only comfort, they cleanse, they restore. Fear may have grown in silence, but mercy comes with sound, with rhythm, with deliberate action. The chaplet at 3 o'clock becomes the conduit through which invisible power flows. Every word becomes a conduit, every bead a channel for light that demons cannot endure. And this is why the hour is feared by darkness itself. It is a concentrated, unstoppable, divine movement of grace. Those who have experienced this hour describe it as a spiritual awakening. The stillness of the night amplifies the presence of God. The quiet allows the heart to focus on mercy without distraction. The repetition of the chaplet becomes not a habit, but a spiritual weapon. It is an act of surrender that pierces the armor fear has built. The enemy may whisper, tempt, or distract, but the devoted soul presses on, and in doing so, shifts the balance of the invisible battle. The soul becomes aligned with the power of Christ's mercy, and fear begins to lose its dominion. It is essential to understand that the power of this hour is not about magic or timing alone. It is about alignment with God's will, about cooperation with grace, about intentional surrender. The chaplet, when prayed at this hour, is not just a prayer for oneself. It is a prayer for the whole world, for those unseen, for the broken, for the wandering. This universality magnifies its force. Mercy is not selfish, it expands, and fear cannot survive when mercy flows freely. That is why the saints emphasized the hour of mercy, not as a superstition, but as a strategic invitation to enter into a profound, transformative encounter with God. Every, for the sake of, is a strike against the darkness. When you reach for the beads and begin, for the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world, it may feel repetitive, almost mechanical, but every single phrase is a strike. Every repetition is a blow aimed at the very darkness that has haunted your soul. Fear is relentless because it is clever. It adapts. It hides in corners no one else can see. It lurks in memories, imaginations, shadows of failure, and whispers of inadequacy. It thrives on silence, on hesitation, on the subtle acceptance that perhaps you are powerless. But the chaplet is not passive. It is not simply an expression of hope. Each invocation is a deliberate act of spiritual offense. It forces the enemy to retreat because it aligns your will with God's mercy, the ultimate power in the universe. It transforms prayer into action. Faith becomes movement. Trust becomes a weapon. The mechanics of the chaplet are profound. The beads themselves are not just markers. They are points of contact with the heart of God. Every, for the sake of his sorrowful passion, is like a hammer, striking through fear, guilt, and despair. Every, have mercy on us and on the whole world, extends the impact, breaking chains that are not only personal, but global, invisible, spiritual. You may not see it with your eyes, but it is happening. Spirits that thrive on anxiety recoil. Chains forged in shame begin to loosen. The soul, previously rigid and bound by invisible bars, begins to move freely, as if it were waking from a long slumber. This is not metaphor. It is spiritual truth. The chaplet is structured so that mercy flows outward and inward simultaneously, confronting darkness wherever it exists, in the world and in your heart. Many people pray this prayer casually, unaware of its transformative power. But when it is prayed with focus, with awareness, with the conscious intent to surrender fear and claim mercy, it becomes unstoppable. The repetition is not redundancy, it is precision. It is surgical, striking the exact points where fear has entrenched itself over years, sometimes decades. Think of it as a battle map where every bead is a strategic position. Each phrase is not just a word, it is a command to heaven, a proclamation that the soul refuses to be paralyzed any longer. The simplicity of the words hides their potency. The enemy knows it. Darkness fears it more than you can imagine. And yet, it is so accessible. All it asks is your willingness to trust, to repeat, to surrender fully. There is also a subtle but profound truth embedded here. Mercy, when extended to the whole world, returns to you multiplied. The act of praying for others forces your focus outward, breaking the inward spiral of fear. It is impossible to remain trapped in self-centered terror while actively seeking mercy for those you cannot see. This outward motion amplifies the strike. You are no longer a passive recipient of grace. You are a participant in its deployment. The chaplet does not just protect. It heals, strengthens, and liberates. It creates a resonance in the soul that fear cannot match. The more faithfully it is prayed, the more deeply fear loses its grip. Chains that seemed eternal dissolve. Shadows that seemed unending flee. And the soul begins to experience a freedom that is both immediate and lasting. This is the hidden power the saints understood. The repetition, the focus, the act of trusting even when the heart trembles. This is what makes the chaplet a spiritual weapon. It is not an abstract comfort. It is active defense and offense combined. Every, for the sake of his sorrowful passion, strikes the lie that you are alone. Every, have mercy on us and on the whole world, proclaims that mercy is greater than every terror, every anxiety, every shadow. Darkness cannot endure it. Fear cannot stand against it. And the soul, finally aligned with the mercy of God, begins to breathe freely, to move freely, to live freely. This is why the chaplet works. This is why the saints taught it, guarded it, and lived it. It is a strike against the darkness, wielded through devotion, repetition, and surrender. When fear blocks prayer, the chaplet as your emergency exit. There are moments when fear doesn't just whisper. It screams. It paralyzes. It sits on your chest so heavily that prayer feels impossible. The words you once spoke with ease become foreign. Your mind frays under the weight of worry, and even your faith trembles. In these moments, many people stop. They retreat. They convince themselves that silence is safer than prayer, that avoidance is protection, that doing nothing is survival. But this is precisely when the Divine Mercy Chaplet becomes more than a devotion. It becomes an emergency exit. It is a lifeline thrown to the soul when the darkness is suffocating, a spiritual rope that pulls you out of the pit of despair into the mercy of God. It doesn't require eloquence. It doesn't demand emotion. It simply requires presence, repetition, and surrender. Fear thrives on doubt and inaction. It grows stronger when the soul hesitates, when hesitation is interpreted as consent. It tells you that your prayers are ineffective, that God is distant, that mercy cannot reach you. But the chaplet bypasses these barriers. It does not rely on the strength of your heart, the clarity of your mind, or the perfection of your faith. It operates on trust itself. Every bead you touch, every phrase you repeat, becomes a pathway to divine power that fear cannot block. The words themselves carry authority because they invoke the passion, the blood, and the mercy of Christ. They pierce through the mental fog that fear creates. They provide structure when the mind is chaotic. They offer continuity when the heart feels fractured. In essence, the chaplet is the mechanism through which mercy breaks into moments where prayer seems impossible. This is why saints and mystics always emphasized perseverance. They understood that the most powerful prayers are often those offered when the soul feels weakest. The chaplet turns fear into an ally, paradoxically, by giving the soul a concrete action when emotions are unreliable. You do not need to feel peace before praying. You pray to create it. You do not need courage before speaking the words. You speak them to receive it. The repetition, the rhythm, the focus on mercy, these are the levers that open the doors fear tries to keep closed. This is not abstract theory. It is spiritual mechanics in action. Mercy flows when the soul moves, even when the heart cannot. Imagine a person trapped in a night of anxiety so deep they cannot breathe freely. Thoughts collide in an endless loop. What if I fail? What if God is silent? What if I am alone? Every instinct screams to retreat. Yet, as soon as the chaplet is begun, even slowly, hesitantly, a shift occurs. Each phrase, each invocation, begins to redirect attention from the imagined horrors to the reality of God's mercy. The mind, previously captive to fear, starts to follow the rhythm of prayer. The heart, previously constricted, begins to relax. The soul, previously frozen, starts to move. The chaplet acts as a bridge, connecting the trapped soul with the source of unbounded mercy, creating an exit from the prison fear had constructed. This emergency exit is not temporary. It is foundational. By using the chaplet in moments of spiritual paralysis, the soul learns that fear cannot dictate its capacity to reach God. It is trained in resilience. It becomes familiar with trust. It discovers that mercy does not wait for readiness. It moves when you act. Fear loses its authority not by denial, but by confrontation, by the deliberate invocation of divine power. Every repetition of the chaplet at the point of fear is a statement. I will not be ruled by terror. I will not be silent. I will claim mercy now. The chaplet does not just rescue the moment. It reshapes the soul's response to fear, equipping it for every subsequent attack, every subsequent shadow, every subsequent night of doubt. The haunting power of guilt, and how mercy dismantles it. Guilt is a silent companion that many carry without realizing how much it controls them. It creeps into thoughts, seeps into memories, and transforms moments of reflection into relentless accusations. Every mistake, every failure, every moment you wish you could erase becomes a chain around the soul. Guilt magnifies fear because it convinces the heart that punishment is deserved, that mercy is distant, that the weight of sin is permanent. Unlike fear, which can strike suddenly, guilt settles in, embeds itself, and becomes a lens through which every experience is interpreted. It distorts reality, making the soul feel unworthy, untouchable, and invisible to God's love. People pray but feel unheard, fast but feel empty, serve but feel unredeemed. Guilt whispers, "You are beyond help. You are too broken. You are unfixable." And because it is so convincing, fear rides its coattails, turning doubt into despair, anxiety into torment, and restlessness into spiritual paralysis. The Divine Mercy Chaplet speaks directly to this haunting. It does not merely address the fear that guilt produces, it dismantles the guilt itself. When you say, "For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world," you are declaring a reality stronger than every accusation your soul repeats. Each word acts as a hammer striking the walls that guilt has built. Every repetition is a proclamation that the blood of Christ is sufficient, that his mercy is infinite, that your past is not stronger than God's love. This prayer does not erase memory. It reframes it. It does not pretend sin never happened. It declares that mercy has already acted in ways beyond comprehension. Guilt loses its power not because it is ignored, but because it is confronted with truth. And mercy is the truth incarnate. Many people underestimate the psychological and spiritual synergy in this prayer. Guilt is clever. It convinces the mind that one is alone, that punishment is deserved, that silence is justice. It isolates the soul, leaving it vulnerable to fear. But the chaplet functions as both shield and weapon. It shields by creating a rhythm of truth, a cadence that the soul can rely on when internal voices are chaotic. It strikes by invoking mercy in a way that fear and guilt cannot argue with. It reminds the soul that no past action can outmatch the mercy poured out on Calvary. It teaches that surrender is not weakness. It is the act that reclaims spiritual freedom. Repetition, intention, and trust converge to transform guilt from a haunting specter into a doorway of liberation. There is also a hidden dimension in praying for the whole world. Guilt often magnifies self-centered thoughts. If I have failed, if I am broken, then everything I touch is tainted. The chaplet, when extended outward, shifts perspective. It breaks the inward spiral of self-condemnation. Mercy is activated not just for the self, but for the unseen, the broken, the wandering. This outward motion reinforces the internal liberation. Every bead and phrase is a dual act of healing. The soul receives mercy, and mercy is released. The act of praying for others expands the personal effect exponentially. The chains of guilt cannot endure this dual current. Shadows recede, doubts dissolve, and fear no longer has the leverage it once held. The soul begins to recognize its worth, not in perfection, but in mercy, in grace, in the love of Christ that actively pursues it. The saints understood this intimately. They knew that guilt is not the enemy itself, but the doorway through which fear enters. They taught that confronting guilt with mercy, even when the heart trembles, even when the mind resists, is the most effective spiritual strategy. The chaplet is designed for this confrontation. Each phrase counters accusation with affirmation. Each repetition dismantles the narrative that the soul is unworthy. And each act of surrender trains the soul for resilience against every subsequent attack. Guilt may linger, but it no longer rules. Fear may arise, but it no longer dominates. Mercy flows freely, breaking the haunting power that once seemed insurmountable, and the soul experiences a freedom previously unknown. The forgotten promise, souls that trust in my mercy have nothing to fear. There is a promise that has been whispered across centuries, recorded in the diary of Saint Faustina, yet often overlooked, buried beneath rituals, devotions, and daily prayers. Jesus said it plainly, "Souls that trust in my mercy have nothing to fear." Simple words, yet they carry a weight so profound that it can shatter fear at its very root. Many souls live in constant anxiety because they have forgotten this promise. They measure their worth by accomplishments, by perfection, by past failures, and in doing so, they give fear the authority to dictate their lives. Every moment spent doubting God's mercy is a moment fear moves unchallenged. But this promise is a declaration, a divine decree. Mercy is sufficient, and trust in it nullifies terror. Trust, however, is not passive. It is not mere acknowledgement. It is active surrender. To trust is to place the entire weight of your soul, your heart, and your past into the hands of God, knowing that His mercy is both present and eternal. And the chaplet is the vehicle through which that trust is concretely expressed. Each repetition of its words is an act of conscious reliance on God. When you say, "Eternal Father, I offer you the body and blood, soul, and divinity of your dearly beloved Son," you are aligning yourself with the promise. You are claiming it, speaking it aloud, affirming it over your fears. Trust is the bridge between the human heart and divine reality. Without it, the promise remains theoretical, comforting in thought, but powerless in practice. With it, fear loses its dominion entirely. This promise also reframes the way the soul interprets trials. Fear thrives when we see difficulty as abandonment, when we believe struggle is punishment, when we imagine that suffering is proof of rejection. Trust in mercy flips the narrative. It teaches the soul that God is present in every hardship, that His love is active even in darkness, and that nothing can happen outside of His divine plan for redemption. In this context, fear is exposed as a false witness. It claims to protect, to warn, to prepare, but it is in fact a shadow standing between you and the truth of God's love. The chaplet, when prayed with this promise in mind, becomes a weapon of discernment. It trains the mind to recognize lies and the heart to receive mercy. Fear is not confronted alone. It is confronted through the living power of Christ's compassion. The forgotten aspect of this promise lies in its accessibility. Many think trust is earned, that mercy requires perfection, that divine protection is conditional. But Jesus' words to Faustina dismantle that assumption. Trust does not require worthiness. It requires willingness. It does not depend on understanding. It depends on surrender. And that is the beauty of the chaplet. It simplifies the complex spiritual mechanics of trust into a rhythm, a sequence, a tangible pathway. You hold the beads, speak the words, focus your heart, and in doing so, enact trust even if you feel inadequate. The promise is fulfilled in action, not in emotion. Each prayer reinforces the declaration, "Nothing can separate you from mercy. Nothing can overpower it, and fear has no ultimate authority." When this promise is embraced fully, it transforms the soul's landscape. Anxiety loses its permanence. Past mistakes lose their grip. Future uncertainties are no longer tyrannical. Every shadow that once loomed over the heart begins to shrink in the presence of mercy. The soul experiences liberation that is both profound and immediate. This is why saints, mystics, and those who lived intimately with Christ's message emphasized trust over understanding, surrender over control, faith over fear. The Divine Mercy Chaplet becomes the practical embodiment of this promise. It is the declaration that mercy is real, that trust is transformative, and that fear has nothing left to claim. In this simple, overlooked promise lies the key to freedom, and in its practice lies the pathway to peace that fear can never touch. The chaplet as a prayer of exorcism over the soul. The chaplet of Divine Mercy is not only a prayer of devotion or comfort, it is a spiritual weapon capable of confronting the most insidious forces that haunt the soul. Fear, anxiety, guilt, and oppression are often manifestations of deeper spiritual unrest. They are not always visible, and their influence is subtle, creeping into thoughts, dreams, and even the rhythm of daily life. They make the soul feel powerless, isolated, and small, convincing it that God's mercy is distant, that protection is conditional, and that surrender is meaningless. Yet, the chaplet functions as a prayer of exorcism, not in a sensationalized or frightening sense, but in a profound, invisible cleansing. Every word spoken, every bead moved, acts as a declaration of authority. Fear, guilt, and spiritual oppression are overpowered by the mercy and love of God revealed through Christ's passion. When a soul prays the chaplet with intention, it begins a process that is both defensive and offensive. It defends by creating a sacred boundary where the enemy cannot easily enter, a space protected by deliberate invocation of divine power. It acts offensively by breaking the chains of fear and oppression, disrupting the influence that darkness has long held. Each repetition of "For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world," functions as a spiritual command, an assertion of God's supremacy over the shadows that seek to dominate. The chaplet does not argue with fear, guilt, or oppression. It confronts them with truth. It asserts the reality of God's mercy in a way that cannot be resisted, denied, or ignored by the spiritual forces that oppose peace. This is why Saint Faustina's writings emphasize the transformative power of this prayer. Jesus revealed to her that souls who embrace the chaplet with trust and devotion are protected from spiritual harm. The repetition of its words aligns the will of the person praying with divine will, creating a resonance that fear and oppression cannot withstand. It acts as a purification, cleansing the mind, heart, and soul, even when the individual may not fully understand the spiritual battle taking place. Darkness may attempt to resist, but the chaplet invokes a force far greater than it can endure: the mercy poured out through the passion of Christ. This is a silent exorcism, one that does not rely on spectacle, but on the unwavering truth of God's love and power. Many people underestimate the scope of this prayer. They may view it as a devotional routine, repeating words without realizing the spiritual authority embedded within them. Yet, those who pray it with intentional focus engage in an active spiritual confrontation. The chaplet reaches places fear has hidden, opens doors guilt has locked, and restores freedom where oppression once ruled. It acts as a light that penetrates darkness, a cleansing wind that sweeps away the cobwebs of spiritual neglect, and a shield that protects the soul from further intrusion. It does not remove free will. Rather, it empowers the soul to reclaim its freedom by choosing trust over terror, mercy over condemnation, light over shadow. This prayer of exorcism is not about fear or dramatization, it is about liberation. It teaches that God's mercy is more powerful than any spiritual attack, more enduring than any darkness, more victorious than any lie. Each bead, each phrase, each moment spent in sincere prayer aligns the soul with this truth. Fear cannot maintain its grip in the presence of such intentional devotion. Darkness may try to resist, but it cannot match mercy. The chaplet becomes a continuous source of protection, healing, and authority. It is the invisible sword and shield for the soul, a spiritual exorcism enacted through trust, surrender, and repetition. Through it, the soul learns to walk freely, speak boldly, and live fully, no longer bound by the chains of fear, guilt, or oppression. One woman's prayer that silenced a lifetime of fear. She lived in shadows long before anyone noticed. Every morning, anxiety gripped her chest before she even opened her eyes. Nights were the worst. Sleep was fractured by racing thoughts, old regrets, and the unshakable weight of fear. Every decision felt dangerous, every moment uncertain. She was a professional on the outside, functional and polite. But inside, she carried a storm that no one could see. Friends offered advice, therapists offered tools, and yet nothing penetrated the deep, paralyzing anxiety that had rooted itself in her soul. Fear was her constant companion, guilt its silent partner, and each day felt like walking a tightrope over a pit that never ended. She had tried prayers before, but they felt empty. Faith seemed distant. Hope seemed fragile. She wondered if she would ever feel peace. One night, on the verge of despair, she turned to the Divine Mercy Chaplet. She had heard about it in passing, a promise recorded in the diary of Saint Faustina, that mercy could reach even the most broken places. With trembling hands, she held the beads and began. Eternal Father, I offer you the body and blood, soul and divinity of your dearly beloved Son, Jesus Christ, in atonement for our sins and those of the whole world. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. The words felt strange at first, mechanical almost, like a ritual she didn't yet believe in. But she continued, one bead, one phrase at a time. She prayed for herself, then for the world, then for people she had never met. She repeated the words until they became a rhythm, a heartbeat, a lifeline. Something began to shift. The storm in her chest, the tightness in her throat, the restless chatter in her mind. It all began to change. Not immediately, not in a dramatic way, but subtly, imperceptibly at first. She noticed that the fear had less volume, that it didn't dominate her thoughts as fiercely. Her breath, once shallow and fast, began to deepen. Her hands, once trembling, relaxed. The phrase, I trust in you, Jesus, began to resonate in her spirit. Fear was still present, but it had lost its authority. The chains forged over decades began to loosen. She realized that the chaplet wasn't removing the problems, but it was transforming her response. It was teaching her to stand, to breathe, to trust, to claim mercy as her reality. Over days, weeks, and months, she returned to the chaplet consistently. Every time fear returned, she prayed. Every time guilt or doubt attempted to convince her that she was powerless, she prayed. The act of repetition became her rebellion against despair, her training in trust, her declaration that mercy is stronger than fear. Slowly, the paralyzing anxiety that had dominated her life began to fade. Decisions became easier. Sleep became restorative. Peace became a tangible reality, not a fleeting dream. She discovered that prayer does not have to be dramatic or mystical to be powerful. It simply has to be intentional, persistent, and rooted in trust. Her life did not become perfect overnight. Challenges remained. Trials arrived. Fear still attempted to speak. But now she had a weapon, a refuge, a method to confront the darkness within. The Divine Mercy Chaplet had become her anchor, her emergency exit, her exorcism, and her liberation. One woman, through consistent prayer and trust in God's mercy, silenced a lifetime of fear. What had seemed insurmountable was made conquerable, not by her own strength, but by the power of mercy enacted faithfully through her devotion. This is the transformative truth hidden within the chaplet. No fear, no matter how entrenched, is beyond the reach of God's mercy when the soul chooses to surrender. Mercy always wins, the final word to fear. Fear does not have the final word. Anxiety does not get to decide the story of your soul. Guilt, doubt, even the weight of decades of spiritual struggle, they are real, but they are not ultimate. Mercy is ultimate. It is the force that created the universe, the power that flowed from the cross, the unshakable truth that Jesus Christ offers to every soul willing to trust. The Divine Mercy Chaplet is not just a prayer. It is a declaration that fear can be confronted, that guilt can be dismantled, that the enemy cannot claim dominion over a heart aligned with mercy. Every bead, every phrase, every repetition is a statement. God's mercy is stronger than any darkness, and His love is louder than any fear. This is not theory. It is the reality that Saint Faustina, the saints, and countless souls have lived and testified to throughout history. When the chaplet is prayed with intent, it creates a rhythm that resonates through the soul. It synchronizes the heart with divine mercy, establishing a spiritual current that fear cannot withstand. What seemed insurmountable, the anxiety that steals sleep, the dread that steals joy, the torment that isolates, loses power because it is confronted directly with truth. Mercy is active. Mercy does not wait. Mercy pursues relentlessly. Fear, on the other hand, is reactive. It shrinks in the presence of mercy, falters in the face of trust, and ultimately retreats when met with faith. The chaplet functions as both shield and sword, defending the soul from internal chaos and attacking the roots of fear, despair, and spiritual oppression. This final truth is simple yet profound. Surrender to mercy is never a loss. It is the path to freedom. Trust in mercy is never naive. It is strength beyond comprehension. The chaplet teaches that no human failure, no personal flaw, no dark moment can outweigh the infinite power of God's love. Souls that embrace it begin to see fear for what it truly is, a shadow that cannot exist where light is actively claimed. The storms of life may continue, the uncertainties may remain, but the heart grounded in mercy finds peace, clarity, and resilience. Every prayer uttered is a step out of the prison of fear and into the embrace of God's protection. Every repetition is a reinforcement of the eternal truth that mercy triumphs over terror, hope conquers despair, and love dissolves isolation. Consider the invisible battles of every human heart, the fears, doubts, and anxieties that go unnoticed by the world, yet dictate the course of lives. The Chaplet of Divine Mercy addresses all of them simultaneously. It does not negotiate with fear. It does not reason with guilt. It declares God's victory. In doing so, it transforms the soul, aligning it with a reality far greater than human perception. The repetition of mercy's words becomes a cadence of liberation. The intention behind each bead becomes a declaration of defiance against the spiritual forces that seek to dominate. What once seemed permanent, the chains of fear, the shadows of guilt, the haunting voices of doubt, now yields under the unstoppable weight of mercy. The soul learns not merely to survive, but to live, to trust, and to move forward unafraid. Mercy always wins because it is rooted in the eternal, unchanging nature of God. Fear can rage, darkness can persist, and human weakness can falter. But divine mercy does not fail. It is patient, unrelenting, and infinitely powerful. The chaplet is the mechanism through which this truth is accessed, the bridge by which souls walk from bondage into freedom. And when prayed faithfully, with trust and intention, it leaves the soul forever altered, no longer defined by fear, no longer silenced by guilt, no longer held captive by the shadows of doubt. The final word is not fear, it is mercy. The last declaration is not despair, it is hope. The ultimate reality is not limitation, it is freedom. Through the chaplet, through trust, through surrender, the soul discovers the victory that God intended from the beginning. Mercy always wins.